I understand that, but I can't see anybody and I can't
So,
raise my hand.
good morning.
What?
Welcome to the New York City Housing Authority's Audit and Finance Committee meeting of December 15th, 2020. At this point, we have a very packed agenda. And to start off our agenda, we are asking our board members, our audit committee members, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Koo, and Mr. Kaplan for the approval of the audit committee minutes of September 17th, 2020.
Comments that I made and anybody else make, I move approval.
I second.
Thank you. It's built into the record. At this particular moment, we're going to start talking about Deloitte's management letter comments for the year end of December 31, 2019. At this point, we will be turning it over to our external auditors, Jill Strohmeyer and Darshan Patel.
Thank you, Tricia. Good morning, everyone. In the deliverables sent to you previously, either electronically or in the mail, you should have received the 2019 report to management, which covers the 2019 audits of the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 1 LLC, and NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 2 LLC. And over the next several minutes, I'm going to take you through the comments that that the Deloitte team had as a result of our audit procedures from the 2019 audit. I do want to remind the committee that as part of our audit procedures, we did not have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies related to the 2019 audit. Those would be the two highest level severity of deficiencies. There were none of those. This letter today just covers what I would call lower level deficiencies and other matters that we want to bring to the attention of management and you, the committee members. So again, lower level deficiencies and other matters today. Starting on page 5, you will see a comment related to lead paint contamination records. During our audit, during our testing of the pollution and remediation liability related to lead paint, the auditors had asked for certain records for apartment units that were tested negative or cleared for lead paint contamination. We made a total of 26 selections. And of those 26 selections, we were provided audit support for 23. Those 23 pieces of audit evidence did confirm the fact that the items selected were either remediated or cleared for lead paint abatement. However, there were 3 selections in which audit evidence could not be provided. Based on our conversations with the management team, it is believed that the reason the support could not be provided was due to the federal government agency reviewing such documentation at a location outside of NYCHA. So the effect of the missing documentation was that as your auditors, we needed to understand the magnitude of the missing documentation, and we extrapolated and came up with a projected misstatement of approximately $45 million of potential understatement of the pollution remediation liability at 12/31/19. This was not material to the financial statements as a whole. But based on this, our recommendation to management of the authority is to consider implementing an electronic system to maintain the lead paint testing records in order to assure the availability of these records and to ensure that the source documents are retained for the appropriate period of time as prescribed by internal and external guidelines.
Excuse me, I have a question on that. I don't know if it's you I should be asking this question of, or the people that are doing these particular things that were during the time that they were doing this testing. And I'm asking so you can tell me, who I need to speak to if it's not you. You chose only 23, where I'm sure there was a lot more. And so any of the discrepancies or the lack of information from other agencies or entities that did the XRF testing, have they retrieved the information from those particular ones which show a different result?
I think your question, Mr. Gonzalez, is for any results that were positive. Is
right,
that
correct?
We also did, I mean, as your external auditors, we also did testing of units that tested positive, and we also received support for selections of that group. We, as part of our audit procedures, we make a sample, so we don't test 100% of the population. We make a sample out of the population. For that positive results test, we received all the documentation we needed to receive to complete our audit procedures.
Okay, so if I'm looking for something specific, then I would have to go to the people that are working on that.
I would say yes. We didn't know any instances of missing documentation related to positive test results, but we did perform a sample out of the total population.
Okay, yes. All right, thank you. That's what I needed to know.
Let me follow up just a little bit there. You say you extrapolated. On what basis did you extrapolate? How close do you think you came to reality when you finally saw the information?
Well, because we were missing 3 out of 26 pieces of audit evidence, we developed an error rate and applied that to the total liability, the total dollar amount of the liability. And so, you know, the only way to pinpoint this number more precisely, Mr. Kaplan, would be for management to perform additional procedures and or retrieve the support for these 3 items. But based on our formulas that we have at Deloitte and the information and the error rate that we calculated, you know, this is the best extrapolated amount that we can calculate.
I just wonder whether after the fact we're able to come to some conclusion about how good your extrapolation was.
Well, Mr. Kaplan, this is Jeff Lesnoy. If I could add some color to the question there. So there were about 34,000 units of the 172,000 units, which were determined to be exempted or previously abated. And we still believe that 100% or very close to 100% of that fit the bill there. So originally in our estimations for the lead costs, you know, we made the assumption that none of the 34,000 had positive lead readings and none would incur a cost or a liability in our statement of net possession. So after Deloitte's testing, and you know, they selected 26 and they found 23 items. The 3 items they couldn't locate, you know, we acknowledged that there was a problem with retrieving documentation. We still believe strongly that all of those would be clear and abated. But, you know, from an audit procedure, and I agree with the process, it makes sense that unless there's support for that assumption, you have to assume that the probability of lead in the rest of the portfolio will also fit the same probability for these 3 items that couldn't be found. So, you know, it's a reasonable assumption, but management doesn't necessarily believe that we have any risk in that group.
But they were but those 3 were taken away, so therefore there must have been something positive there.
Well, all 26 of the requests were challenging to get for similar reasons, because the documentation was being maintained off-site by an investigation team, and the NYCHA team had little or no access to that. So it wasn't as if that they all had positive lead. It was that we couldn't retrieve the documentation to support the premise that they didn't have positive lead.
So would you go back then and check?
Well, I think we've tried to retrieve for those documentation and we've been unable to access them. Rasul, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, I think these documents are when we say these 34,000 that Jeff was talking about these are the units that in the past they were tested, XRF tested, and if it was negative, we apply for exemption through Department of Housing Preservation, which is HPD, or if it was positive, we abated them based on the standard of EPA and HUD, and then submitted the application for exemption on this unit. In the past, I'm talking about these are all happened in sometimes during the 2000 and maybe 2015 or 16. So the document and exemption that it was accepted by HPD, it was there. But this document was seized by the Saturn district, and we didn't have any access to this document to provide the backup documentation on this XRF testing and abatement. So eventually, once we get this document back, we can fulfill our obligation to provide this document.
Well, is it likely that when you get them back, you'll test them against your extrapolation to see how good your extrapolation was for future reference?
I think, based on the document that we provided on the 26, on the 23, we had backup XRF testing that shows, if it was negative or if it was positive, we abated them. And now we're testing additional unit, not based on random sampling. Now we're testing each individual unit in our portfolio to make sure that we don't have lead-based paint, or if we do have, identifying where they are. But with these exemptions that Jeff was talking about, these were done and it was certified by HPD that we didn't have no issue at this unit.
No, let me see if I can make myself plain. Mm-hmm. There's an extrapolation on the basis of which you recorded a $45 million liability.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Kaplan, there was no adjustment to the financial statements. This was
I understand that.
So this $45 million was not reflected in the financial statements, which is appropriate.
I'm not trying to argue whether the financial statements were proper or not. All right, I'm looking at the fact that somebody did probably a very sound accounting treatment and decided that there's a $45 million liability based upon some formula to extrapolate from existing data. Then said that it would seem to me that somebody would want to know that when the data was available, that whether your extrapolation turned out to be reality. And you're telling me that nobody's ever going to check that when you get the data back from the feds.
I think that's something that can be looked at, Mr. Kaplan. I would say that if the data comes back from the feds and affirms management's position that they were tested negative and abatement was cleared, then we will know that this $45 million was not, it was just an extrapolation. But if there's no errors, we don't see errors, or we see that the support coming back for those three selections supports management's conclusion that everything was abated, then the $45 million, I would say, it was just an extrapolation. I don't want to say it was an error, but
no, I understand. But is anybody going to test that by looking at the apparently you can get the documents back from the feds. When you get the documents back, do you see whether or not they match up with the extrapolation to see whether next time around you use a different extrapolation?
I would say historically we have not done that, but I think that's a good suggestion and something that we can look at as part of this year's audit work. Assuming that, of course, those documents come back and are available to us during the 2020 audit.
I understand that, but if you're looking at it from sort of a layman's point of view, I'll recognize that $45 million is not material to the financial statements as a whole, and you don't have to qualify anything. I'm a member of the public. I see $45 million, and I'm told that somehow you could narrow that down, I think, when you got the papers back. And if you didn't get it back, next year you might have to do the same extrapolation if you were missing.
No, I understand. I think I understand your point, and to determine whether or not the extrapolation itself was accurate And we can do that. We can take a look back during the 2020 procedures.
All right, I think I made my point enough. Then the other thing is, I read here that it says recommend the authority implement a system to maintain lead-paint testing records in order to ensure availability of testing records and to ensure the source documents are retained. Well, the second part of it doesn't relate to the first part. You have an electronic system that doesn't ensure the source documents are retained. So what you're really saying is you need an electronic system and you need a records retention program. Because to ensure the source documents are retained has nothing to do with the electronic system. Am I right?
Yeah, we can change that wording, Mr. Kaplan.
I'm sorry to get a...
So,
all right. I'm
so,
sorry to slow it down. Why don't you keep going?
I still have something for Razul. Are you still on?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're talking about spending money with the procedures on the lead paint and the rest of everything that revolves around it. So if you have information of other testing that was done, and it does, and do you compare it with what you have on record? If you have anything on record, and if so, what is the procedure to eliminate that lead-based problem?
I think if you're talking about what we have tested in the past versus what we're testing now, we're not going back and retest the unit that we already tested and we got the exemption on. What we're testing is all the unit that we haven't tested individually or the development that was tested based on random sampling. Because HUD allow you to, a development has 1,000 units, HUD allow you to do a percentage of those unit tests.
Right.
And if you get negative result, you could assume the whole development is negative. That's what we did in the past. But now, based on current initiative that we are doing, we XRF test in every unit, not based on random sampling, based on individual units. That's why we decided to do 134,000 units to be tested.
Okay. So you have a unit that was tested. It showed it had lead base, but nothing has been done since. And you get that information. What do you do with that information before you move forward to put it on record?
Now, right now, what we're testing now is on the record is electronic. We have electronic and paper record on this XRF testing that we're doing. Once we test all the unit, then we are working on the plan to abate all the unit that we have positive component in them. And priority will be given to the child under 6. The unit with child under 6.
Exactly. Okay. So any new information that you get, you will work on and then report. Correct?
Yes.
And do you have a particular procedure to use on units that tested positive, and how you're going about getting those units to be abated?
Yes, as I said, we have a plan. Actually, the system, once the system see the data on XRF result, it creates the work order for abatement. And if it's peeling, it creates another work order for immediate remediation. So this way we don't wait, because abatement is going to take time. It's not something that, first of all, we have resources to do all the unit at the same time. That's what I said. The priority will be on child under 6 unit to abate those units. And we are working on that plan. We already put contract out for unit with child under 6 with 1 or 2 component positive. So we're working on the contract. We put out 4 contracts for those.
I guess we'll see some reports sometime in the future regarding this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is, again, this doesn't relate to the auditor, it relates to the operations. If you have an apartment with a known lead problem and a child underage, how do you defend yourself against a claim by that child or its parents for some damage by saying, well, we're going to take 6 months or a year to get it done?
Again, I mean, we're not health department, so health department is overseeing all EBLL cases. So if we do see a referral get from health department that there is a child with EBLL issue, we expedite those and we abate those units as soon as we get the referral from health department. So we're not sitting on, if we get a report from health department that there is a child under 6 with the EBLL issue, we expedite those abatement right away.
What's the average time from receipt of that report to the finishment of the abatement?
Usually, it depends on how many components are positive, or how many, order we get from health department. It could be within a few days, or it could be within a week.
Yeah.
I
had the videos before of everybody. Before this.
I have, if I may, one other comment here. It's more the accounting. Get to the on page 7. You're talking about the ledgers with $408 in one side and $6,000 in another.
Yeah.
Isn't it embarrassing to even have to mention that here? $45 million is immaterial. Why isn't $408 immaterial? Just looks amusing, that's all.
Do you want me to continue on moving through the comments at this time?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mark, maybe I'll skip to number 3 and then I'll come back to number 2. Our third comment on the bottom of page 6 had to do with identifying closed bank accounts during the monthly bank reconciliation review. For NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 1 LLC and NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 2 LLC, one bank account for each was closed during the year or in a prior year that had a balance in the general ledger and included in the preliminary trial balance.
Switch camera? Okay, let me go there.
And we believe that management did not have the appropriate review control to identify these closed bank accounts during the authority's monthly bank reconciliation process. And as you noted, Mr. Kaplan, there was an effect of a nominal effect on both the LLC1 and LLC2 ledgers, whereby the amount was corrected by management prior to the release of the audited financial statements. I understand that the dollar amount is low, but when you think about it from a control perspective and what could go wrong in the future, perhaps it was just maybe luck that the dollar amounts were small. In the future, this dollar amount could be larger. And so we do feel that there's a place here for possible control enhancement and improvement. And so we're recommending that management perform timely review of the general ledger account balances and make those necessary enhanced controls to make sure that any new or closed bank accounts are identified and properly reflected in the ledger and ultimately the financial statements.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I just want to point out that as a reader, if I see $45 million is not material, and then I see a thing for $408 is requiring a paragraph here, it's a little amusing.
Noted. Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
I'm sorry.
Okay, then maybe at this, if no other questions on comment 3, I'll move back to comment 2, which has to do with our testing of IT controls. This comment has to do with access to security and password configuration. During our audit work, we noted that that current password settings lack a combination of complexity and password expiration parameters were set to either password were set to null. I'm sorry. And in addition, one user with administrative access to the Oracle financial application have their password set to not expire, which is against the authority's baseline policy. And so, you know, users should be required to comply with strong password parameters, which include minimum length, password expiration, and account lockout. If users are not required to comply with strong password parameters, their passwords can become known to other employees and potential intruders. The user account could then be used to gain unauthorized access to the systems and the data of the housing authority. So it's our recommendation that the account settings for these two identified parameters should be changed to reflect the IT policy, and that the authority's IT policy states that passwords must be set to expire every 60 days and complexity settings be enabled. The user should be reminded of the importance to comply with the authority's IT policy.
I can't see the page that, I mean, I see the page, but I can't see the page number.
I'm on the bottom of page 6.
6, okay.
Our letter, the middle of the page, and this relates to access, security, and password configuration.
Okay.
Yep.
So moving.
I'm surprised it took so long to get them to function on this thing. We get it every 4 months at our firm. And oftener. Okay.
So those are the only 3 deficiencies that we noted for the 2020 audit. Moving to page 8, we have 2 other matters that I would like to bring to your attention. One relates to the timeliness of providing tenant revenue documents. Each year as part of our annual audit, we do detailed test work related to tenant revenue. We make certain that we pull certain selections of tenants. We pull their entire tenant file. We confirm that the amount being charged as rental or rent to the tenants is appropriately calculated. And I understand this is a rather decentralized process given the number of complexes that are located throughout the city of New York. But over the last couple of years, it has taken quite some time in order to pull the tenant files and provide them to us for us to complete our audit work around revenue. And so our recommendation is that the authority consider implementing some type of electronic system for housing these records to ensure availability of the tenant revenue records, as well as consistency with regards to source documents being maintained, and consistency meaning across the different complexes throughout the city.
Consistency in the sense of that it's the same procedure at every development, not just certain ones.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. That it's consistent and that the files have all the same documentation for each development.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Very good.
And they're you know, I think in management's response is noted here as well, and that they're taking efforts to try to determine what's the best approach to remediating this comment.
Excuse me, Rip, can you move this down to the management response for 2019, please? Thank you.
Is that page 8?
Page 9.
Page 9, yeah.
Page 9.
You're missing an S at the end of the first paragraph of management's response.
Page 9, okay.
Let me tell you something. I thought that the succession planning language was so interesting that I made a copy of it for every board I sit on. And I wonder, just as an aside, you got something that's generic that I could get my hands on? Because this I thought was a very useful way of talking to management.
Yes, Mr. Kaplan, this wording was derived from information from the GFOA website.
Oh, okay. It's
been tailored. It's been tailored as needed for NYCHA, but the basis of this comes from the GFOA.
I go to those references that you referred to on page 10.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the last comment, which is on the bottom of page 9 and continues for the next couple of pages, deals with succession planning, specifically succession planning related to the accounting team at NYCHA. And it's just, something that we think that management should pay attention to, keep their eye on, determine whether or not they have the appropriate team in place and the appropriate bench strength, meaning if folks were to retire or to leave the company, would there be folks to step in and assume those responsibilities without much delay. And so once again, we've had this for a couple of years, and I understand there's been some changes around the accounting team the last several years, so there's been some headway here. I think that, perhaps there's a little bit more room for consideration of possible improvement and determining whether or not the appropriate bench strength is in place going forward.
I thought it was very useful. Nothing to do with just the accounting business.
Yeah, and yes, Mr. Kaplan, sometimes this comment is structured more broadly to cover all departments of the organization. In this case, we've structured it really to focus on the accounting team. But yes, this can be used for any department or function in any organization.
As I said, I sent it already to 6 different enterprises.
And so those were the only comments that we had this year. A total of 5, 3 deficiencies, and 2 other matters. If there are no, that concludes my prepared remarks related to the report to management. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
In the interest of saving time, I'll leave the other questions for a later date.
Tristan, would you like us to move into the single audit report for 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And Jill, if I could just interject for 1 second, I just want to thank Rasul, Sylvia, and Patty for joining. I think you can feel free to drop off at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the results of the 2019 single audit. There is a prepared slide deck that was passed to management. I don't know if that's available for presentation on the screen at this time, but it's a PowerPoint presentation.
Talking about the one that's our 2020 audit service plan?
I think the next item on the agenda, Mr. Kaplan, is the results of the 2019 single audit report.
Okay. Yep. I got it all printed out.
And for the gentleman who is running the screen here on Zoom, was there a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation titled New York City Housing Authority Summary of 2019 Single Audit Results that you can share on the screen? Perfect. Yes, that's it. Okay. And so I'm going to turn this over to Darshan Patel, Senior Manager, in just a minute, but I just wanted to remind everyone just so you know what the single audit is. Because the New York City Housing Authority receives significant federal funding and expends that federal funding on the appropriate allowable expenditures, and because you expend more than $750,000 in a given year, the authority is required to have a single audit performed. And so our single audit it really covers the financial statement audits, in which we audit those financial statements in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, as well as generally accepted government auditing standards. We also have a report on internal controls related to financial reporting and compliance. And then we also have a final report, which is our report related to our test work around compliance of your major federal programs. So at this time, I'm going to pass this over to Darshan Patel, who will walk you through the slide deck on your screen and the results of our single audit for this year.
Hi, good morning. Everybody can hear me? If you can go to the first slide. So in the COVID-19 times, single audit requires a lot of documentations and in the planning, which I'm very glad that we were able to accomplish it very, very smoothly. We received all the compliance control over the Deloitte Connect, and we planned ahead. We used to have a meeting every week to get a status on the single audit, and we did receive all the documentations. And even though in COVID-19 timeline, we also maintain our work ethics. Second slide, please. So in the single audit, this is just a summary. You should have another report, which is a longer report. You will see an independent auditor's report, which is dated September 17, 2020, and also dated September 15, 2020. The reason being, this report has been issued as of September 17th, and now we are issuing with the supplementary heard information, the single audit, which is completed as of December 15th. The difference between the previous version and this version is this independent auditor's report is done according to government auditing standards. That's the only difference. The second opinion you will see is a report on internal controls over financial reporting. We have done that. We have no major comments on discover any finding on your report on internal controls. And the third opinion is the independent auditor's report on compliance for each major programs. And that will be dated as of September 15, 2020. And once we issue the single audit report, we will perform REACT procedure, and that will be dated September 18th, 2020. Next slide, please. Anyway, the next slide you should see is a major programs. We have completed 4 major programs this year. 2 of them was the Department of Homeland Security. 2 programs were the HUD programs. We have done a risk assessment. Total expenditure for this year was $3 billion, and we have tested about 4 programs in 2019. We have no findings, material findings or significant findings. The threshold for this year was 9.2 million. That means every program receiving more than 9.2 million is subject to audit based on the risk assessment. And that is the overall summary for the single audit report. If you have any question on a longer version on the report or the program, feel free to ask me.
Just to recap related to the single audit, Deloitte audited 4 major programs as part of our 2019 audit. We had no findings related to our work related, for those 4 programs. So no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, no instances of non-compliance noted during our work this year. Upon your approval of the single audit financial statements, Deloitte will be in a position to issue our report final this week.
Do you need a motion?
Yes, we do, but however, we have one member that has been kicked off, which is Mr. Kaplan. So IT is working to get him back on so that we could make the motion across the entire Audit and Finance Committee. So at this particular moment, Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Koo, if you have any additional questions, it would probably be best to ask those.
Yeah, the question is, I don't know what I did with the presentation. I had it. I got everything else but that one.
Do you have a longer version of single audit report, the big one?
I'm sorry?
There's another version which is a full report.
This one?
Yes, that's one.
Yes.
That is a full copy.
And when Darshan says full copy, it's all the single audit related information. There is a note that the financial statements which you approved in September are not included in this package, just because we thought we would save paper, and you've already reviewed the actual financial statements. So what you have in front of you, Mr. Gonzalez, are all the reports and schedules related specifically to the single audit.
Right. No, this is great. I mean, it had all the numbers for every different audit that you did, and highlighted in green, and that's all really good. But the report he just did, I know I saw it somewhere, but for the life of me, I've got every piece of paper. I think I don't know what I did with it. It was sent.
It looks like something like this, Mr. Gonzalez. It has like a circle on the front.
The only one that I found is this.
All right, that will be next. That will be what we.
That would be the next.
Right. But the one that you're showing me, I can't find it.
Darshan, is there anything specific that you think should be, since Mr. Gonzalez does not have his package, is there anything specific that you would just like to highlight that maybe provide clarity for him at this particular time?
I think Darshan went through it.
No.
Okay.
I have it. I know it's here somewhere.
But Mr. Gonzalez, all the programs are listed on page 141, the document you have.
Okay.
And I'm just going over the slide. So if you go to 141, you will see all programs. And the page after that, you will see the next slide, which shows no deficiency, no material deficiency, and no findings.
141.
141 has the programs listed.
Yeah, I have the letter. You're talking about this?
No, right after that.
Okay.
I had a question, Darshan.
Yes.
On page 144,
okay.
It indicates that the indirect cost rate, the authority has not elected to use the 10% de minimis interest cost rate.
Yes.
Is indirect cost rate. Do they have another indirect cost rate that they're using?
So let me just give you a little background. 2015, OMB came up with new uniform guidance. In that new uniform guidance, they said two things. You can have an indirect cost rate, or the entities who do not have indirect cost rate should use 10%. They just gave right off.
Right.
So it's the required notes we have to submit every year to the government, saying,
Yes.
are we using that 10% or we are not using the 10%? NYCHA does not use 10% because we have our own indirect methods.
Okay.
And that is a statement, but a statement must be made in every note saying we do not use that 10%.
Well, do you need to clarify that you in fact have an indirect cost rate that's been approved by the federal government?
No, we not required, not required.
Well, just out of curiosity, do they have an indirect cost rate that's higher than 10%?
I think they call it management fees. Ayat can explain that more, but they call it management fees.
So they do have an approved indirect cost rate
Yeah.
from the federal government.
Yeah.
Which they put into management fees.
Yes.
I see.
Now, Ms. Roberts, they're asking for a vote, but we still haven't
Mr. Kaplan.
discussed the. But we still haven't discussed this part yet.
I believe that is the plan, and Jill, correct me, for the 2020 year, not for the 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
So we'll go over the plan for the 2020 audit after the completion of our discussion here on the single audit for 2019.
Oh, okay.
So different fiscal years. Mr. Kaplan is back on.
I'm back on. Thanks.
Yes. So Mr. Kaplan, they're at a point asking for a motion to approve the results from the single audit results. I'm not sure what part you were able to hear, but if you have any questions as it relates to it prior to us going into approving the financials to move it towards the resolution.
So you want me to make a motion? I move it.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Now where are we?
We're still on single audit. We just approved it, but you have to get my vote too.
Mr. Koo?
Don't you have to get all three of us? I approve.
Okay. So at this point, Deloitte, Jill, and Darshan, we should move forward to the second half of the meeting where we're going to be talking about the fiscal year 2020 plan.
Can I ask a question before we get to that?
Absolutely.
On the I'm going backwards to the management letter dated today. Jill?
Yes.
On the management letter on page 2 at the bottom, the last sentence, it says, this report is intended solely for the information and use of management, the audit committee, federal awarding agencies or pass-through entities, and others within the organization. What does others within the organization mean?
So, I would say anyone who's not management
Well,
that would like to read this report.
I'm
glad you raised the question. I don't like those kind of limitations. Why isn't the public entitled to see that letter?
No, it
I'm required to put that language in there.
It says within the organization, so that's within the housing authority.
Within the housing authority, yes.
Okay, it's not the public; it's within the housing authority. But I don't understand. I don't understand why you specify the 4 things and then you say and anybody else.
Within NYCHA, limiting it to within the organization, not outside of the organization.
Right. Yeah, but
Jill, I, as you know, have a problem with that kind of restrictive language. I mean, we are a thing of the city of New York, and why shouldn't any citizen who wants to see this be able to?
Well, this is the management letter, Mark.
No, I understand that. But why can't anybody who wants to look at it?
I know, Mark, we've had this discussion over the years.
Yeah.
I know, and sometimes I win and sometimes I lose, but some of the firms don't put it in anymore.
Well, okay. But I had the question, not related to the public, but I have the question, well, what's the point of putting in that sentence if you've already specified the specific entities that are supposed to only see the report? And then you say all others and anybody else.
Within the organization.
Within the organization. So I just didn't understand what that meant.
I will always take the position that anything like this from an accounting firm should be public, not just within the organization, but any member of the public.
All right.
And,
okay.
I feel very strongly about that. There's nothing I can do to change it, but Jill, you can expect to hear from this every time you put that kind of language in.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So are we ready to move toward the second portion,
yeah.
reviewing the 2020?
Yes.
Okay, Jill. And
all right, so quickly moving from 2019 to 2020. In front of you, I hope, or you either received electronically or via mail, the 2020 Audit Service Plan. If you're following along on the screen, it's the document that says New York City Housing Authority, our 2020 Audit Service Plan. So perhaps if someone from the IT could put that on the screen. Great, thank you. Then this service plan covers our 2020 audit for the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 1 LLC, NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 2 LLC, as well as our single audit. So I'm going to start on page 4 of this document.
Don't go so fast, if you don't mind. What's the purpose of talking about vibrant capital markets on page 3? We don't have public debt, do we?
You don't issue your own public debt, but you do have debt outstanding.
Well, this gets me back to my earlier point. If this has to do with vibrant capital markets, that document you just restricted might be of interest to those people. So, okay.
Page 4.
Would you prefer that I take you through the document, or you've had enough time and you would just like to ask questions on the document? I'll follow your lead on that.
Well, why don't you go through it?
Okay. So I'll start on page 4, just talking about the engagement team. So again, I'll be leading the audit efforts as your lead managing director. I'll be supported by Darshan Patel, who is our lead senior manager and single audit expert. We will also have a concur partner or a engagement quality review partner, Greg Kozlow. He will be a resource to both Darshan and I as we progress through the audits for 2020. I do want to let you know that Greg is new to the engagement. Terry Kyle, who was our second level review partner last year and prior to last year, retired at the end of October. So we have identified Greg Kozlow as his successor. Greg is the lead of our public sector practice here in New York, has served on the MTA, New Jersey Transit, and will now be joining the NYCHA team as a resource for both Darshan and I. During our audit, we will use a number of specialists. Management engages a number of their own experts to develop certain liabilities such as pension, OPEB, claims liability. And because management engages experts, we also engage our experts to review those methods and assumptions used in calculating amounts. So Deloitte will be using specialists related to actuarial calculations, but we'll also be using certain specialists related to our test work for IT and security controls, our valuing of investments, as well as reviewing of journal entries.
I want to go back to page 4.
Sure.
On the last paragraph, I would like to know if you can provide me with an example of that last line on the last paragraph.
So these specialists will regularly update management on technical accounting, industry, and other matters that affect the authority to minimize surprises and provide timely information to improve your understanding and ability to respond when new standards are issued or accounting developments occur. I can give you an example. When the authority implemented GASB statement number 75 related to other post-employment benefits, my internal actuary, John Potts, his picture's on the next page, page 5. I brought him to discussions with management at the time, along with the New York City office of the actuary. So it was Deloitte at the table, including my specialist, management, as well as the city's actuary, to discuss the implications of the accounting treatment related to that new standard adoption. So when there are new adoption of standards such as OPEB or pension, and I can foresee leases in the future being another one of those topics, I'll bring my specialist to the table to have discussions with management and management's experts.
So another thing that throughout this whole presentation from the start till now, Deloitte keeps mentioning that you talk to management. Now that's a wide spectrum. So is there any way that you can narrow down exactly who it is in management that you're speaking with so that we know on the audit committee who those individuals are and what is the process or the reason that we are discussing with these people? Because I'm sure it's probably different facets of the audit. So it would be nice to know who we're speaking to, who you're speaking to about subject A and who you're speaking to with subject B and so on and so that we have clarity. If we have questions to ask, we can go through the governance and ask those questions to those individuals directly.
Sure. Yeah, we do use the term management pretty loosely, so we can try to narrow that focus. Sure.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Jill, will management now include the property managers at each development? Is that part of the term management?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, management you do use that term pretty loosely. When I use the term management, my first thought is going to the accounting team, but yes, it could also mean management that runs the real estate group or a pension group or an HR function or the payroll function. It really.
I'm referring specifically to the supposed changes in the reorganization of the NYCHA, which now is going to invest more authority in the property managers. Mm-hmm. And so my question is whether the audit will now include a review of that, particularly in light of one of the audits that you're going to do on tenant revenues and receivables.
Yeah, so there'll be management personnel that we will be speaking with during our 2020 audit. Yes.
Okay. All right. And I would hope that the 2020 engagement focuses, on that tenant revenue and receivables, because that's the sole source of income for the housing authority. So it's very important that be, and there was some issues with that the last time. So, so could you please focus or have some kind of a focus on that as part of your engagement this year?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another point that I'm glad that you guys have found that consistency is definitely something that needs to be implemented in all areas. That whatever happens in the Bronx happens in Brooklyn, happens in Manhattan, and happens in Queens the same way. Whatever the process is, any accounting functions, anything at all that would affect the dollar value of an expense, that it's all consistent. that we do the same thing everywhere. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay. So moving to page 5, just pictures of your team, your core team. Myself, Darshan, Greg. I mentioned John Potts. He's one of our lead specialists related to reviewing of assumptions and methods for pension and OPEB. Leah McGuire is my IT specialist. She really leads the efforts in testing internal controls related to all your systems that are in scope. And then Santiago Jaramillo, one other key member of our team who really leads the day-to-day efforts of the audit with Jeff Lesnoy and his team. And so he'll be returning again this year as well.
Just out of curiosity, Jill, how many accountants do you have all together that put their hands on our audit?
I would say that numbers are between 50 and 55, Mark, including specialists, behind the scenes, reviewers, people that I consult with in national office along the way. I would say between 50 and 55.
Thank you. I'm just always curious.
Yeah. On page 6 begins our discussion on risk assessment. Risk assessment is really at the core of what we do. Our annual audit begins with the risk assessment process. And we identify risk of material misstatement associated with the authority and its various businesses, material account balances and disclosures and assertions. So in developing our audit plan for each material account balance, we consider what could go wrong. How could an account balance that's on the financial statement be materially misstated? And we think through that as a team on, how an error could occur at a relevant assertion. So how could an account balance be inaccurate? How could it be incomplete? Is there a chance that an account balance is recorded in the incorrect period, meaning fiscal 21 versus fiscal 20? And we also look at control activities related to the assertions. We determine whether or not controls exist, if they're designed, if they're implemented. And then based on our knowledge of the organization, discussions with management, our assessment of what could go wrong for each account balance, along with the associated controls that may be in place, then we determine as a team the level of testing that we need to perform. Do we need to perform a more enhanced level of testing, performing more detailed work, or can we perform a lower level of test work? And for this year, we've identified at the bottom of page 6, one area that we consider to be a significant area of focus or a significant risk for 2020 based on our preliminary risk assessment. And that relates to management override of controls. Management override of controls is a pervasive risk because it's unpredictable in nature. There is a risk that there could be a material misstatement to the financial statements if there was a circumvention of internal controls and management overrode certain controls to post perhaps an incorrect journal entry or a fraudulent journal entry. Management override of controls is a significant risk for all of our audit clients. At every client, we look at this. We look at journal entries posted throughout the year, focusing on manual entries or entries that are posted that have a certain characteristic to them. For instance, journal entries that are posted by upper level of management, we would tend to look at those because folks in upper level management typically wouldn't be posting journal entries, so we focus on those. We focus on journal entries that are round dollar amounts, those that are perhaps posted on a weekend when the authority is typically closed. So we look at journal entries that have certain characteristics that are of interest to us that may be indicators of potential fraud. We also review management estimates for bias during the course of our audit. We have discussions with management and management experts, particularly around property and casualty claims, pension liabilities, and OPEB liabilities, just to determine whether or not, when calculating those estimates, there was any bias on the part of management. And then we also have inquiries of management around any significant or unusual transactions that occurred during the year. In addition to management override of controls being a significant area of focus, in the middle of page 7 are also some other areas, not significant in nature, but areas that we consider a focus. We'll pay close attention to these areas during our 2020 audit. And those areas include our work around capital assets, including construction work in progress, cash investments and debt, so anything related to your treasury cycle. I mentioned pension and OPEB liabilities a number of times. That's an area of focus. Claims as well. Mr. Koo, tenant revenues and receivables is on this list. We will be looking at that again this year. It's a significant revenue stream for the authority, and we do work around it each year.
Let me ask a question on that. Do you look at missing records? That is information that is not forwarded upwards or even to management? Information on for example, if somebody comes in with a cash deposit or cash to pay their monthly rent, how do we know that information is not missing?
For tenant revenue, we make selections. So we get a detailed listing of all the amounts that make up tenant revenue recorded in the general ledger. And we make selections. And those selections are at the tenant level. And then we ask that management provide the tenant files for our selections, and we obtain those. And we look at the tenant files, we do a recalculation of the amount charged to the tenant. And then as part of that process too, on a selection basis, we will also vouch that the cash was actually received, if in fact paid, or in certain cases, if a tenant did not make a cash payment, has management considered the appropriate reserve on that receivable? Okay. So we are looking at those items during our test.
Okay. So you're looking at missing information, missing data, in addition to recorded data. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
This is Anika. I just have one point of clarification. Adham Chukri, I believe you're on the line and you manage the receivables area. It's my understanding that a NYCHA employee does not take cash from a tenant, that there are a number of ways to pay, but sort of a property manager taking physical dollars from a tenant is not one of them. Adham or Jeff, can you just confirm that for the benefit of the committee?
Yeah, hi, it's Adam. That's correct. I mean, we management do not accept rent. It's usually kind of mailed. We have 8 different ways for the residents to pay their rent, and we don't accept cash. If there is cash that happened to come into the office via mail, there is a standard procedure where 2 people have to witness it and count it, and report it back.
Okay.
And by the way, Richard, it works on the other side as well. For example, if there's a discrepancy somewhere where the authority may owe some monies to the resident, it is done as a credit electronically.
Okay.
So there's no physical dollar exchange.
Okay. Thank you.
In addition, there are...
I'm sorry. There was something at the end of the Deloitte preliminary audit response, and having served in the military and security and law enforcement, I'm just curious if you could tell me or explain what is electronic data interrogation techniques.
Are you looking, Mr. Gonzalez, and can you reference a page number just so that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm at the page 7 in the section where it says management override of controls. And if you go to the right, the very last paragraph, the very last sentence in that paragraph says identified using electronic data interrogation techniques.
Yeah, we have a program, a proprietary program that actually analyzes all of the journal entries posted by management in their general ledger system. And when we dump all of the journal entries into this program, then the audit team sets certain parameters of what we're interested in knowing about that total population. For instance, I mentioned a couple of them, entries posted on a weekend, posted by a particular individual, entries that may have a description where the words may be indicative of fraud. So if in the description of a journal entry, there are words like potentially misclassification, error, fraud, those type of words that are actually in the description of a journal entry, this program will flag those for us to look at more closely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just out of curiosity, in the course of your audit, how many of those flags do you have?
It depends, Mark. I've seen engagement that flag 1,000, and sometimes we have to rethink our parameters and make certain our parameters were set correctly. Sometimes we see as few as maybe a dozen flags. I would say the norm is to have probably between 20 to 30 flags each year.
That's not very many compared to the total number. Okay, just curious.
And again, it's flagging all the parameters. So a journal entry can either have one of the parameters that we flagged, or it could have several. And so what pops out as a result actually tells us we've had 10 entries flagged with one parameter. We've had 35 entries flagged with 2 parameters. And so it allows us to then drill down even more to determine what we're going to look at. And some of the entries are duplicates. Oftentimes you'll see that, okay, perhaps the same entry is done in the same round dollar amount every month. And so once we get an understanding of what the first entry is, then we get comfort that the next 11 are also appropriate. So we do get to, we do use the initial results, understand that some of them may be duplicates because you do certain entries each month.
So, okay, wait. So now we're still on the same page and we're still in the financial statement audits. And I'm going to the bullet point where it says environmental pollution and remediation liabilities. Mm-hmm. And you give an example. Mm-hmm. So then I'm going right to the very next part where it says using the work of internal audit. And it says we do not plan to use the work of the internal audit function. Mm-hmm. Now, wouldn't that directly relate to that lead paint remediation and abatement?
No. So what this means is that we, as your external auditors, obtain all of the internal audit reports that are issued in any given year. And we read those internal audit reports, the relevant ones, as part of our risk assessment process and determining what areas we will look at. What this means is that if internal audit was to actually do, let's say, its own testing of a financial statement account balance, we don't rely on that test work. We actually perform our own work on that account balance. Okay. But we do collaborate with Trisha's group and the internal audit group to read the reports as part of our risk assessment process. It's an important part of our process, actually.
Thank you.
Let me go back to 1 or 2 lines above that. You have the environmental pollution and remediation liabilities are not considered significant. Those are very big numbers, aren't they?
They're big numbers, but they're not considered significant risk, Mark. We don't consider them significant risk, but we do consider them significant as far as the amounts on the dollar amounts on the financial statements, and that's why they're here in this section as another area of focus. But the auditing literature is very specific in what's considered a significant risk. We don't consider lead paint to be a significant risk, but rather just a normal risk with a higher focus.
Boy, if you look at the way the world looks at the NYCHA, the remediation liabilities and less the pollution is a tremendous focus of public attention.
Right.
And it seems to me it's kind of odd that maybe it's not a significant risk from a technical accounting point of view, but I think the world thinks it's significant and probably is in dollars.
And Mark, maybe I can change the wording here of this header to maybe make it more clear that these are still significant as far as amounts on the financial statements, to make it more clear to your point.
Listen, my view of this, let me tell you, we're going to have a mayoral race this year, and there are lots of folks who are trying to run, several of whom I know. And I think that any point where somebody can pick it apart is a point we ought to think about. And I think it's not a great idea for us to have something that says remediation liabilities are not considered significant risks, because they are, other than to an accountant.
Okay. Yep.
So are you suggesting that they take off the parentheses, not considered significant risks?
I don't know what they do, but I don't particularly like the idea of my being involved in something which says the environmental pollution and remediation liabilities are not significant.
Yeah, that's why I raised the tenant revenue issue, because that is the major source of income for the housing authority. So I don't know.
I understand that. I agree with you. So I'm just building on what you say. I think that in this year, when we're going to have a heavily contested mayoral race, everybody's going to be looking at each of these things and saying how he or she knows how to do it better. And I think we don't want to be in a position to give them a point of contention with us. Right. I think I urge the organization to think about the disclosures it makes and the language it uses in the light of the fact that it's going to be a flashpoint in this election.
Okay.
I can work on this wording here to make it more clear.
Okay. Can we move on?
All right, moving to page 8 is just a summary of the reports to be issued in the upcoming year. No changes from the prior year. We'll have our report on the CAFR for NYCHA, the reports on the 2 LLCs, our annual communication to you, the audit committee, at the conclusion of our audit. If there's any management letter comments next year, we'll plan to issue that as well, similar to what we discussed earlier today. And then, of course, your single audit report.
Let me just point out something that's a peculiar language. You have one line that says communicate with the audit committee, and then you have meet with the audit committee. How do those two fit together?
You're talking about the audit timeline down below, Mr. Kaplan. So
yeah.
I guess it's the 5th line is communicate with the audit committee the results of our audit. We do that at the conclusion of our audit. So when you review the financial statements that are prepared by management, at that meeting, we will also provide you with a document disclosing the results of our audit. In the interim, I always like to have an open door policy. If something comes up in the interim, there'll be open communication between us, Deloitte and the audit committee prior to that final communication letter if needed.
May I make an editorial suggestion?
Mm-hmm.
The audit timeline is not 2020, it's 2021.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you for that. So moving on to page 11, and if there are any questions in the middle, just let me know. I'm just gonna, in the essence of saving some time, I'm gonna move to page 11, which just talks about the expected impact on our audit due to COVID-19. It is expected that for a good portion of the upcoming 2020 audit, we will still be working in a virtual first environment, meaning Deloitte will be working in a virtual first environment, which means simply that if Deloitte and the team members can work from home, we should do that. For instances where we are required or need to go to a client site, that permission will be granted. And of course, we will come to the site if we need to, whether that's to review audit support or have a discussion with management, whatever the case may be. But for the most part, if possible, we'll be completing the majority of our audit procedures again virtually. But with that, on this slide, it kind of goes through some of the things that we'll be doing at the various stages of our audit as a result of COVID-19. You know, more discussions with management, more frequent discussions with management, specifically the accounting team regarding open audit requests, status. We'll use Zoom or Microsoft Teams for those discussions. We'll also perform certain control walkthroughs using Zoom or Microsoft Teams. If we have to do physical observations of any type of capital assets or construction in progress, we'll plan to do some of that virtually, whether it be through a FaceTime or possibly a Zoom call as well.
We'll be looking. You spell observation correctly, though.
Yes.
I tell you, this is the first time I've ever looked at a report like this and looked at it, and I thought it was the dentist looking at my mouth.
I'll let the graphic folks know in the Deloitte marketing team.
Yeah, the molar on your right side has a cavity.
So, and then we'll have additional discussions with all levels of management around COVID-19, its impacts on the organization. We'll have a focus on projected cash flows again, and the ability for the organization to continue to pay vendors and make payroll. None of this is new. I mean, we completed your 2019 audit in the heart of COVID, in the middle of the pandemic. We started the 2019 audit, I believe, last March and completed over the summer timeframe. And we completed it completely virtually. So from where I sit, I would love to be back on site and perform as much as we can on site. But if that just isn't an option, then we are equipped to move forward again this year with the audit virtually. And I think it went quite well, given the circumstances. We completed everything timely. We received most of what we needed very timely from management. Again, all due to our frequent touch points and the use of certain tools such as Deloitte Connect and Zoom. So. On page 12, each year I'm required under government auditing standards to share with you our latest peer review report, meaning Deloitte's latest peer review report. This latest peer review report was from 2017. So you have seen the results of this at a prior meeting. So the latest peer review report, the results from Grant Thornton, who is our peer reviewer, was that we received a pass rating, which is the highest possible rating we can receive. I can let you know that Grant Thornton is in the process of completing our 2020 peer review report. The results are not available yet. I expect those results to be available in the near future. Once those results are available, I will absolutely share those with the audit committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have no, page 16 talks about ethics, independence, and compliance. I have no, each year I report to the audit committee if there are any concerns around independence or other work that Deloitte may be providing to NYCHA, the organization. Outside of the audit work that we perform, I'm not aware of any other services that Deloitte provides to NYCHA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our independence is not impaired.
Let me raise a question about the language. The 3 bullets from the bottom on 16, you'd say partners, principals, and professionals. On the next page, you talk about all employees. I always assumed that anybody who works in one of your firms has to get training in the ethical rules. Is there a difference in language here for some reason, or just it's an oversight?
You know, all employees have to take training around independence as well as technical training on subject matters, various subject matters. There are additional trainings that professionals must take at the partner, principal, and managing director level.
Oh, I understand that, but if you go to the next page, you get an annual representation from partners, principals, and employees. So it's a distinction there. All right.
I think there's one is relates to training efforts, Mark, on the bottom of page 16 that relates to the actual training that we need to take. And then page 17 really talks about we have to go in each year and kind of represent that, you know, we're independent. And there's a series of questions that we need to answer. And that's on actually a biannual basis. It's almost like a conflict of interest. I want to maybe equate that to what you see, maybe a conflict of interest representation that you do annually. That's what page 17 is getting at.
Okay.
And just to be clear before we sign off, so you mentioned in all of this that you would contact and let everyone know if there was any changes, whether it's procedural or any interaction with the authority or the audit committee or anything that would affect because remember, we're on a timeline as well. And so anything that comes up new, I guess we will know immediately. Right, and then this way we could, you know, due to the restrictions that are put upon us, so that we have time to either have a meeting in between before we can actually evaluate what these procedural changes are.
So, Mr. Gonzalez, are you referring to possible other opportunities that Deloitte can provide to the organization?
That's one, and then there could be others if there's a change in how the reporting is done. Is another. So
if there are significant changes to our audit plan, so for instance, if because risk assessment is an iterative process, so if new information, facts, circumstances come to the attention of the audit team, we have to consider those. That new information could perhaps could result in us assessing risk at a higher level, or perhaps moving one of those areas of focus from areas of focus to significant risk. So if we, if there anything comes to light in which we move classification, or we determine that an account balance that was maybe at a lower risk is now at a more elevated risk or a significant risk, I'm required to report those changes to you, the members of the committee. So any significant changes to this audit plan, I will communicate those to you.
And reporting as well. In other words, like
if
if something happens within the organization, not yours, ours, and the reporting takes a different route, then we will be notified of that in order for us to assess how we move forward.
Yes. And if there are any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, I'm also required to communicate those to you rather timely. So if anything comes up related to fraud, non-compliance, or significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal controls, again, all matters that I need to communicate to this committee timely. And I will do so.
Thank you very much for clearing that up for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. And last but not least, pages 17 and 18 has to do with technical updates. These are new GASB accounting pronouncements that may or may not affect the organization in the future. In the spring, I believe it was May of 2020, GASB, which is the standard setting body for which NYCHA follows, they actually issued a statement number 95 that delayed all new accounting pronouncements by either 12 months or 18 months as a result of COVID-19. So my understanding, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, for 2020, there will be no requirement to adopt any new accounting standard as they've all been delayed.
That's correct. Looking forward, all the pronouncements are effective either 2022 or 2023. And while there's always an option to early adopt, we haven't considered that at this point.
So with that, that concludes my prepared remarks related to our 2020 audit plan. I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you may have.
Everybody good?
We're good.
So I guess we have the motion. Hello?
So, yes. Is there a motion on the floor to accept the 2020 plan, fiscal year 2020 plan, 2021 plan, sorry, 2020 plan moving forward?
So moved.
Richard Koo, and second?
Second.
Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Kaplan?
He's there, we just can't hear him.
Yes, Mr. Kaplan?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Did you approve the motion to accept?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, this motion will be now put towards a board resolution to present to the board.
Okay.
So just to be clear, Ms. Roberts, what was the official start time and end time?
So we have one other section, which is the status of internal audit we wanted to give you because we started, so we have one other PowerPoint attached to this. So the conclusion of the external audit portion of our discussion is over, but we do have now the portion that relates to internal audit and where we are in our plan.
Okay.
So next slide, IT. So we wanted to give you a status of the internal audit activities and what has been taking place thus far since we did our risk assessment. Next slide. So we're just going to give you an overview from the enterprise risk assessment from the board approval to where the plan is now, how the engagement process is moving along, and just highlight some particular items in terms of external audits that are currently being updated, any federal audits that we're involved in, as well as any collaboration between internal audit and compliance at this particular time. Next slide.
We're following you with the information that you said because we don't see the slide.
Yes, so we're now going to slide 4.
Okay.
So as you're well aware, each year we do an internal risk assessment similar to what Deloitte does for their risk assessment on the external side, taking into consideration working with each of the EVPs, identifying any business risks, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, what we call the SWOT analysis. Based on that risk, we prepare an internal audit plan based on the established criteria and look at any assessment, the scores. We meet with the chair, the GM, as well as compliance to formulate that plan to give them an understanding of where the risk may take place when it comes to the business units, what is at risk in terms of working units, and also what we have discovered from previous audits for the prior year. This year, because of COVID, we prepared our audit risk assessment as we normally do in the month of March, but however, it wasn't presented to the audit committee until July 2020, of which you guys, the audit committee reviewed, accepted, and moved towards board approval. It was established in board approval in 2020, so the plan for 2020, which had been the calendar year, really commenced on August 20 of this year. So what we normally do is finish our plan within the calendar year. Because of COVID-19, this plan is going to move into the calendar year of 2021, and we will do a risk assessment, I would say by the first quarter, no later of the second quarter of 2020 to kind of assess what the new risks are. Hopefully at that particular time, we may be back in the office, but if we're not, we would still conduct this risk assessment across the executive departments to ensure that we have highlighted what risk is actually taking place. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of what the internal audit engagement process takes place, much of it is done within the planning phase, where we, similar to an external audit, you have an engagement letter, entrance conference with the auditee, you do a walkthrough, narrative, and charting the phases of the process. Field work, which takes up a good bit of that time, is sampling and testing those findings relative to the discussion we've had with the specific business units. And then we go into the reporting phase, which spends a lot of time with that preliminary report, the exit meeting, draft report, and final report. So internally, the auditor writes the report, but works with an assistant director to ensure that those findings are relevant. It moves through the process to the director, as well as then it comes to my attention prior to going to the auditee. The auditee does get an example of the draft report, and they're allowed to give feedback and corrections until we have the exit conference, and then a final report is issued. Those final reports are distributed to the auditee, as well as the chair, the general manager, and of course, the audit and the finance committee as we see fit. And as Jill mentioned, they are also shared with the external auditors for this to give them perspective of what is going on from a business unit perspective, and how the operations management or maybe technology issues that may exist are being corrected. In that, the follow-up has changed a little bit. Prior to that, we would do a post-audit, or what we would call an assessment of those areas. But now that we have the compliance department, we have spent a lot more time streamlining that process and sharing all of the internal audit and assessment reports with the compliance department so that they can continue their continuous auditing processes and identifying risks within the units, as well as working with those units to ensure policy procedures are updated accordingly. So they're moving more into looking at that findings, looking at those corrective actions, and ensuring that they are met from a policy and procedure perspective, so that if there is a need to go back and re-audit, that those same findings are corrected in a speedy manner, as well as those particular items will not be found again. That is the thought process in terms of moving forward to ensure streamlined processes and compliance, and moving forward to address some of the issues that we have had at the authority in the past. Next slide. So this is a slide that you're accustomed to. This is what the 2020 audit plan looks like. We had planned 40 audits. It is across audit and assessments across the entire organization. 40% of that is operational, 25 is financial, not actually checking the financial aspects of the accounting aspects of it, but what is actually taking place within the department. So it could be RAD that has a financial component to it. So there is a large impact of dollars. We can be looking at the self-insurance process in terms of financially what that is, what the risk associated is. It does not go into looking at the financial reports, but looking at the impact of the business and as it relates to the organization as a whole. Next slide.
Excuse me for 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
I don't seem to remember. What's the difference between an assessment and an audit?
So the audit, we normally take a full-blown process from beginning to end, and we take a large sample. The assessment in many cases may be a process that may not be fully mature, but we are stepping in and looking at that process where they're at, giving feedback. We're taking a sample, but it's a little bit more focused in a particular area as broadened. So it may not, a great example would be, I would say, a RAD. Many of our RAD deals were in its infancy, so we were looking at the process. So we assessed the process and took samples of some of the actual processes that took place, but we couldn't go through the entire process because it didn't finish its compliance. So we gave a high level review of what is taking place, where they're at in the process, if they're meeting the guidelines. To go back, if we went back now that some of these deals have been conducted, we can look at beginning and end as well as where those dollars went to. So it's a little bit, in most cases, some places call it what they call a desk audit. Someone will call, ask for a review, and in that review, we look at those processes to move forward. The sampling is just much smaller as opposed to with a full-blown audit where the sampling is much bigger and a lot of pulling of records.
Once you use the word desk audit, I understand.
Right. So yes. So many people have moved away from the title of desk audit because it sounds like you're actually sitting at a desk and not actually pulling it. So the assessment has been much more of a common term used in the internal audit at the particular time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to give you, even though we've been living in this new plan, I would say as of August, September, we have assigned all of the 40 audits to, with the exception of 2, which is on hold, and 45% is in the research phase. 7% is in that planning phase. So we're about to issue the entrance conference letter to the auditee. 6% is in field work. So they've gone through the entire process of having the entrance conference and research. 15% is, which is the first quarter audits, are in the process of the drafting and reporting. We expect to issue those reports in January, of which we will be working with the providing those to the auditee. And then of course, internally, after those reports are accepted, they will be provided to you, the Audit and Finance Committee, as we've always done. And the last 2 in the 40 on hold because of the processes of working internally with compliance and giving them the opportunity to address those areas so that it can be a much more fruitful audit because it's maybe in the process of being redeveloped or working on its compliance. So those are some of the trade-offs myself and the compliance officer have made in terms of timing. He has particularly be working on particular areas. So we want to get those areas to its maturity so that when audit comes in, we're able to look at the process from beginning to end and pull a sample that's representative of what is actually taking place. Next.
Excuse me, just one quick question.
Sure.
With all these monitoring and extra process and a lot of work, so is the authority, to help with the timeline, is the authority adding more personnel so that it could, move forward and even be more efficient than it already is?
Are you asking adding personnel to the audit department or adding personnel to? No,
to the auditors.
No.
Itself.
At this present moment, we haven't had an increase in headcount at this time to move forward. So we are working with the staff members we presently have and trying to be efficient and effective relative to that. Would an add in personnel make a difference? Of course, it would give the opportunity for the department to have a bigger scope across the authority, but those are decisions that are being made by executive management relative to our financial standing as an organization.
Well, I wish you luck. It's a big endeavor, and again, it would be nice to be able to meet those timelines and move forward.
Tricia, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
To what extent are these audits covering the core emissions of the authority at this point? In other words, the mold, the lead paint, the pest control, the elevators. To what extent is there overlap, or are these? I mean, are these audits covering those areas in addition to other units in the housing authority looking at that?
Yes. So those particular areas are being shared between myself and compliance. Okay. Compliance is working on monitoring and getting those areas up to a certain level and par. And then when the time exists, which is the appropriate time, audit is going back and taking samples and working in tandem to see if it is working to the respect to expectations. In terms of the federal agreement, we do have specific audits as it relates to that particular area. However, because of COVID, as you know, and as of timing, it takes time to get these areas prepared to live into that agreement. So based on those metrics, we're giving those particular units that timing to update themselves so that we can go back and give a proper analysis. I believe in this particular plan, I can always send the guys back to you guys. It does cover many of the HUD areas that were highlighted.
Okay, so would you be able to send the committee a list of those audits that are currently in process?
Absolutely.
The names of them?
Yes, I can. I will resend you the plan and the resolution as it was adopted in August, and I will tell you, I could also give you a status of where those specific audits are at this particular time. We do have a more detailed analysis to this. However, because of timing and the ability to go over that information, it wasn't included in this, but we can break it down much further for you.
With a highlight on the HUD agreement ones that are required.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So you're welcome, Mr. Koo. So this is just a breakdown written to give you an idea of what these particular audits are and the definition and description of the particular phases. Just wanted to give, perspective outside of the actual chart that you saw.
Do you ever execute a surprise audit?
There are requests for certain aspects that are surprise audits, but in that we also have the DOI, which does a lot of those investigations and shares that information with us, and we reach out to them to give them aspects of that. So there's other entities working within NYCHA to ensure that that is being covered.
Thank you. Well, let me pursue that.
Say that again?
The way I would look at surprise audits, how many surprise audits do get done in the organization over the course of a year, whoever does them?
Oh, it can be, sometimes we get letters from Department of Investigation. We can have up to 29 reports in a month, or it's all relative to people calling in, calling into compliance on DOI, and those things are brought to the attention of either DOI, myself, or compliance, and it is split within that. But in all of those reports, we provide feedback and go back to the particular units to get answers to fulfill those requirements.
And so the organization probably has a hotline for complaints. To whom does those go?
So there is a hotline. Some of the complaints go directly to the compliance officer. Some could go to the New York City Department of Investigation. It really depends on the complaintee and which method they use. But in that, there is overlap and discussion to understand if they're the same request or concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next slide. And this comes to the external audit part. Next slide, please. So these are some of the external audits that are in place that we've, myself as well as compliance, have been working on. The HUD Section 3, we have given, that one has been going on for a while. We've given them some feedback on some particular contracts. They have it. We haven't had a final report, but we have submitted everything as of date. I think our last issuance was sometime in September, October this year.
What's a Section 3? What's a Section 3 program?
The Section 3 program is where the authority makes it in its provisions, people that live within the development, that they get opportunities to work on projects internally. This, I would say, is Mr. Gonzalez's one of his pet peeves and his biggest initiatives. So every contract, there is a provision that people that live within the developments or within that community, which would consider low to middle income, that there would be hires relative to that particular contract. So HUD, this is something that HUD looks at, and they've asked us to, they picked a sample of some particular contracts of which we've provided them with the information of how those dollars were spent and, you know, the type of services as well as, I would say, skill set needed for those particular projects. In some cases, it may apply. In some cases, it may not. It depends on what the skill set is needed and if it can. But there is an effort to actually include Section 3 hires in all of our contracts across the authority.
So, for example, if there's a painting contract, somebody would look to see if there are NYCHA residents that are eligible to apply for the painting work.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, Richard, this year there's been, I guess, an update, and now they can get Section 3 hires from the private sector, or should I say non-NYCHA residents, but it depends on their economic status.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Department of Homeland Security, which we're a part, just is reviewing the state FEMA. We may be a part of that audit because NYCHA is a sub-recipient for much of that dollars. Any requested information we do have to provide. So we are not the main auditee, but we're a sub-recipient because we receive money. So if it is asked, we do provide that information as needed. Of course, there is always the New York City Comptroller's Office. They're in a process of looking at the oversight of daycare centers. That is in, I would say, the fieldwork option of the phase of the audit, where they're asking for particular samples. So in that, even though we're in COVID, they have been very active, and we've been working with them to provide that information. And as we were mentioning, I think, Mr. Kaplan, you mentioned the areas of surprise audits and issues of compliance. That takes place with the Department of Investigation. Currently, we're addressing 73 PPRs, which we call policy and procedure recommendation, and across 29 of reports. And those 29 was within this quarter, and we do reach out to specific areas, mostly in operations, to provide information, data, to look at those corrective actions on the issues highlighted, to provide feedback to the Inspector General. And we also keep those as a part of the monitoring process and working with compliance to ensure that these areas, that if they have internal control deficiencies, that they're addressed. So next slide. That's the relationship between audit and compliance. This has been, you know, a constant review and issues of question. Myself and the compliance officer have been working on further streamlining the process between the particular teams and ensuring that we have what I call belts and suspenders moving forward to ensure that there's a natural trade-off between the information that the internal audit department is doing, as well as what compliance is doing, so that we could ensure that if they have findings or they have risk that they've taken into consideration, it is passed on to our team to ensure that we do audits and assessments in those areas, and vice versa. Next slide. This slide kind of highlights the relationship and how those steps are going to take place. Most of it starting with the internal risk, enterprise risk assessment, which you guys are provided, that looks at the risk across the entire organization. The audit plan and those audit plan reports that are given to them that highlight the risk and controls, of which myself as well as the compliance officer meet on a weekly basis to discuss how we're moving forward, especially as well as many of his team members on the policy and procedure side. And now he has a what we call a compliance department investigation and policy procedures unit that we share that information back and forth, so that they close out, provide closeout audit reports to close out compliance reports to audit to ensure that many of the items that we have brought to their attention have been reviewed and updated. They are a part of the external audit process, of which we share much of the information with them. We manage the process from beginning to end, but we do work collaboratively in issuing final statements back to the respective areas, may it be the New York City Department of Investigation, the HUD, or if it's the Comptroller's Office. But in either case, we work collaboratively to ensure that we bring those, have a full statement back to these particular areas on how we're moving forward. The other 4 areas are really within steps 4, 5, and 6 within the compliance department. And compliance and IIA continue to work with the business units to ensure that the corrective actions are completed. So we are more so living into this HUD agreement, working collaboratively with each other to ensure that if I'm identifying risk and issues of control on the front end, that on the back end in that corrective action manner, that he is doing the monitoring and risk assessment moving forward, and vice versa. If they're doing a monitoring and they feel that the monitoring is not only within this particular area, but may expand across the authority, it is brought to our attention so we could include that in the plan. I know that's a mouthful. If there's any questions, concerns, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Koo, Mr. Kaplan, please feel free at this time.
This looks straight up as it's supposed to be. I mean, compliance is something new that has come into the authority due to the agreement and everything else. I think it's a step in the right direction. I just don't want it to convolute everything else. You know, just let's get it straight, let's get it done, and this is what we're gonna do to do that. And that's bottom line for me, and I think it works. I think it's headed in the right direction, and I believe that they got 2 people at the helm that's gonna really take care of that.
Well, thank you. I would say, I know the compliance officer is not on the actual meeting today, but we do meet every week. We have a very open discussion, highlighting some issues. There is definitely transfer of data between the 2 teams to ensure that we are clear, concise, and making best use of the resources that we presently have at the authority.
Thank you. I gotta say that both Deloitte and you guys have hit upon something that I've always been talking about, and it's consistency. And I think that's gonna be one of the major issues that's gonna move us towards, I don't wanna say perfection, but let's just say moving towards getting things done the way it's supposed to be done and not have to worry about any improprieties or anything, you know, just move forward and knock them dead, you know? Use the expression.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Koo, Mr. Kaplan, any thoughts, final comments prior to us closing our meeting for today?
Oh.
Nope.
I had one thing that hit me.
Yes, sir.
We have some kind of a monitor that's posed on us, right?
Yes, we do have a federal monitor.
Does it make any sense to show him that we're moving, to ask him to come and talk to us?
I think that is a question we probably can pose to the chair's office, if that is something that you are.
Been doing a job that he may not have been accustomed to seeing, or if he has, and I think it might be a useful way of making him feel that we're doing the right thing. But I leave that to you.
Well, I guess based on your recommendation and request, we can follow through internally and see if we can make that feasibly and possible.
I don't know how my fellow members feel about that. I just threw that out.
I don't have a problem with it.
I don't either, and that's why one of the reasons I raised the question about the overlap with the federal monitor, federal agreement with the internal audits. There is definitely an overlap there.
So that is something we will definitely take back and see how, if there's possibilities to address that within the community.
I can't remember who is the monitor.
I don't know his name. That's a good question. I don't know the name off the top of my head.
His name is Bart Schwartz.
Bart Schwartz.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
So if there's no other further questions,
Tricia, could you send us the names of the 7 reports that are going to be sent to us in January?
Yes, I will send you a whole list of what the plan looks like in more detail. I just didn't include it in this. Okay. We do have it internally. It would just be so much to look at. We do have that. That's the part of the background information, as well as what those reports are and the expectations that are coming out of it. That's not a problem.
Now what's the next step in terms of this committee? What's the next meeting?
Good question. We are coming to the end of the year, so we will have to work internally to see, I would say, look at our calendars between Deloitte as well as internal finance to come up with a new audit schedule or audit committee schedule that we'll send to you your attention, hopefully early in the year. Yes. Okay. And the assumption is we'll still be working remotely, so we'll still have this in virtual meetings until otherwise stated.
Yeah.
All right.
So if there's no other further questions, I move to ask to call this meeting today for December 15th at 12:14 p.m. for the Audit and Finance Committee to close and adjourn.
I think our custom is now to have an executive session among the 3 of us afterwards with the auditor.
So,
or not?
Well, historically, that has been the case. If that would be the case in this particular situation, it would require that the other members of this particular meeting, with the exception of IT, because they will have to continue to help to monitor it, would have to come off, and then including myself, and then I would have to come back on to officially close the meeting. Vilma, is that particularly, I see you're on, can you give us some feedback on how that is being done on the broader perspective of the board?
The board has not engaged in executive session, so there has been no need for them to come back.
Okay.
In this case, if they feel a need to do executive session, we would have to coordinate, I would believe, a separate meeting, because this meeting is being recorded publicly. Okay. And then we would have to, I guess, keep this open or have people call back in. This is a public meeting. So it does, if they come back, we do need to have it on record. And it does need to be public.
The New York City Audit Committee, which is a much more significant body than we are here, has the process at every meeting. It has an executive session with the auditors and without management, and then all by itself. And we've had no problem doing that. And all we do is we go out of regular session into executive session and then back into it during the meeting. And if anybody wants to figure out how to do it, the New York City Audit Committee, or you can talk to them about it, but we have figured that out years ago. I don't know how my fellow members feel about this. I just tell you I'm accustomed to doing it. On every audit committee I sit on, which is probably about 8 or
9. To our IT people, is it possible to put them, because now we're dealing with the added layer of virtual. Is there an opportunity within this meeting, while you keep it recording and they go into executive session so that we don't have to resume it again as another session, is put them in a lobby?
Well, how did the 2 of my colleagues feel about having an executive session?
I don't have a problem with it. Normally, we would have it, and that's the only time that we can communicate.
Rip, you are the host. You can probably create different rooms, or David, and then we can have a separate one.
So I was going to mention if it's possible to create a breakout room with those particular members, which would be Darshan, Jill, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Koo, and Mr. Kaplan.
That's not possible. That would have to be done in a meeting, not in a webinar.
Okay. All right.
So the best probably is disconnect this one and connect again.
Well, that would also present a problem is how do we get back to Ms. Roberts to let her know that it's done? I believe that to save time, we can have one, but at a later date, because it looked like it might. Listen, we're having technical issues as it is. I don't want this to extend too far, and then we find out that we couldn't finish it due to technical issues.
Okay, just to be clear, if you enter into executive session, you need to have a motion to enter the executive session. And what is the purpose of entering into executive session? Because you can only do executive session under certain circumstances.
Who's giving that advice, please?
This is Vilma Huertas, and I'm just restating what is in the open meetings law for New York State.
Well, I got to tell you that the New York City Audit Committee operates on a different rule book then. Mm-hmm. Somebody ought to talk to the New York City people and find out how we manage it there.
Yeah.
Because I tell you, at the end of every open meeting, we have an executive session and we pick who we have there, including the auditors. And we haven't got any problem of just going in and out. So
we're not saying that there is an issue with going in and out. You're certainly entitled to meet an executive session, but open meetings law provides that you can meet an executive session under certain circumstances, and you do need to make a motion at this meeting. That's all I'm saying. I didn't indicate that you couldn't do it.
Just a point of information, this meeting is not only recorded, but it's also being broadcast on YouTube right now, live.
Same thing with the city. Same thing. And I quit. I think we've had enough today, fellas, I suppose.
All right. In the interest of time, I would suggest we have another meeting.
Yes, I concur.
Okay, let's do it and somebody figure out how. And
right. Right.
But and that would be the interest is to do it right now today, or you guys wanted to move it for another time? Okay.
No.
I share the view. I have other things that I'm already late on. So, can I move we adjourn?
Yeah, I second.
I agree.
So based on the adjournment, we are now calling the New York City Audit Committee meeting for the New York City Housing Authority closing at 12:20 on December 15th.
And starting when?
We will send out an email with the new dates for the 2021 calendar year. Mr. Gonzalez?
I'm sorry?
Was that clear?
No. I asked what was the start time of this meeting?
The start time, I believe we started at 10:12 we started.
Okay.
Are we adjourned now?
Have that information correct.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we adjourned.
Not even a good joke today, huh, fellas?
Thank you. We're off.
Are we adjourned?